Some views there from the Highlands. Well, I'm joined now from Edinburgh by Dr. Sarah Kyambi, who's Director of Migration Policy Scotland. It's a think tank that assesses public attitudes towards migration and advises on migration policy. Welcome to the Sunday Show, Sarah.
Thank you very much.
It does seem that immigration numbers peaked around 2023. They've come down since then. How significant are the numbers and what's behind all of that?
Well, the peak was a historic high back in 2023, and we have seen that come down considerably to around about kind of pre-pandemic levels of 200,000. And what we do know is that high immigration numbers tends to raise this political salience of immigration as an issue. So it's possible that's what we have seen in recent years, where we've seen more kind of political focus on those issues. But we have also seen at the same time issues like small boats and asylum accommodation, which are both actually quite small parts of the overall immigration system, attract a lot of attention, get a lot of focus, generate some very divisive views, and in a way distorting a debate that's also about vacancies, that's also about labour needs, and is actually much more complex in a way that's reflected often in our attitudes data.
Yeah, and some of that might explain why this is number 3 on the priority list for people at this election when they were asked ahead of the election by the BBC. When it comes to actions that politicians can take, what works and what doesn't work in terms of dealing with this?
In terms of actions politicians can take, I think inflammatory rhetoric around these issues has been unhelpful. The numbers are coming down, and I think we are seeing with that, while we're still seeing a rising trend in cooling attitudes, it'll be interesting to see where those go next. I think recognizing and explaining to people how there are opportunities for migration, including what we get through student migration, what we get through labour migration, and how those can be reaped, is something that we know from the discourse in Scotland is something that people do get to see. We know in Scotland people are appreciative of the benefits that migration brings in terms of perceived impacts. Those that people agree strongly with is how migration contributes differently in jobs, how it enriches social and cultural life, and how it helps to offset population challenges.
And when we look at this growing concern amongst the public and attitudes towards this, I mean, you've mentioned there that this is a nuanced debate. It's multifaceted in terms of workers and also, in terms of local provision. Do you think that nuance is getting through when it comes to this debate?
When it comes to the attitudes data, what's always interesting is if you ask by route, so while we are seeing a cooling debate in general, cooling views across the Scottish public in general, where there's a growing agreement that preferred levels should be lower. When you break that down by visa routes, for 5 of the key routes, so for instance for skilled worker visas, for seasonal and temporary work, but also for humanitarian visas, we've got over 70% who agree or that the levels of immigration coming in under those routes should either increase or stay the same. So there's actually, I think it's important not to overstate and recognize that what people feel about immigration is actually often very mixed, and people can see both things at once. And I think sometimes in the reporting and the politics, that gets simplified into kind of presenting those views as though people are either straightforwardly for or against immigration, whereas actually I think a lot of the Scottish public have got far more mixed views than that.
Well, in terms of the public's views, do they align with what the UK government, for instance, is trying to do on immigration?
I think that's a really difficult question. I think when we looked at policy options and policy preferences in last year's data, there are, in terms of overall wanting to reduce immigration, yes, the proposals to do that have been very effective, and that does align with the trend in views. But at the same time, reductions in the time that students could spend on a post-study work visa, that doesn't align with what we saw people's preferences were in our questions on that. Similarly, actually, views on access to social benefits and social housing are actually much more generous than I think the debate often allows. It is often reported in the general debate.
Well, Sarah, thank you very much indeed for discussing all of that with us. And we're